Hi, I'm Jeff. If I've earned your attention at the end, then we can talk at the end. I have an actual slide for that. But let's talk Kerberos for a bit, because there are 3 attacks and 3 steps to login flow and 3 components involved that I think once you understand these, it turns out the attacks of golden ticket and silver ticket and Kerberoasting will all make a heck of a lot more sense, which is kind of awesome. So press play here, somewhere around here. All right. So Kerberos is named after Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog to Hades. It turns out it's named after the 3-headed guard dog to Hades for a reason, because there are 3 roles inside of Kerberos. We have a client who wishes to gain access to some service. The full name is service principal name. And if they both trust the domain controller, then good news, we can use Kerberos. Right? So far, so good? Okay. Well, the full name for service is service principal name, by the way, not service principal IP address. So if you're accessing things by IP with a tiny, tiny little asterisk, you're not using Kerberos. You're falling back to NTLMv2 at best, which will segue nicely into the next conversation about NTLMv1. So each of those 3 roles has a secret. Domain controllers have a very special secret. It is the password hash of the KRB TGT built-in account. It's a disabled account. You don't actually use it to log in per se. It's the password hash of that account is the secret that domain controllers use to sign tickets. I think it's somewhere between TGT and TGS that people are like, I'm confused and frightened of Kerberos and I'll just give up. So work with me here. We're going to get further. The client's secret is just derived from their password. It's the password hash for it. The domain controller has that very special account. Between domain controllers, they're using KRB account password hash to sign these ticket-granting tickets. Or the analogy I'll use is magic bands, right? Going to the Magic Kingdom, to Disney World, you have this thing that represents you, and you can go wherever you want and present your magic band, your ticket-granting ticket. Well, services are usually, we're talking about computer accounts, but user accounts can have services as well. And service principal name is literally an attribute of a user account or a computer account. And that account's password hash is that service's secret. Oh, and by the way, domain controllers have everyone's secrets, the authoritative copy, right? Username, tab, password, enter. Password is incorrect. No, domain controller, I have the right. It doesn't matter that you have a different opinion about your password. The domain controller is authoritative here, all right? So we've seen these flows before, and there's a great little YouTube video talking through Kerberos in multiple layers. But let's do the 3 flows of Kerberos the way I like to describe them, right? The first flow is just logging on. Hey, domain controller, I'm proving access to my password hash, and you get your magic band, ticket granting ticket, right? The thing that proves you are who you say you are, thereafter inside the environment. Now, the next flow is asking for an introduction. When you do username, tab, password, enter at the console, that's literally you going through the first flow. In memory, Windows is managing for you your ticket-granting ticket. Domain controllers aren't usually busy with doing TGTs, processing logons. They do a lot more introductions, right? If you log on to a machine, you're doing so for a reason. It's to access services. So domain controllers will happily make an introduction to any service in the environment. Domain controllers are built for scale. Kerberos is built for scale. You don't have to inform the domain controller when you change the permissions on your SQL server, web server, file server, etc. Those services get to make up that, get to choose the permissions assigned, right? And again, authorization matters at the service level. For the most part, domain controllers care about authentication, proving you are who you say you are. The services get to choose. And we have the nice little visualization there. I know who you are, little Timmy. I know you have your magic band, but you must be this high to ride. The service is still disallowing access based on that service. So it turns out that once you understand these 3 flows and the 3 roles and the 3 secrets, you actually got golden ticket attacks, silver ticket attacks, and Kerberoasting for free. All right, so let's talk through that for a moment. The only thing that signs your magic band, whether you're at the Magic Kingdom or inside of Kerberos, is some secret that you don't have. So what if you have that secret? Then you forge your own magic band, you go on all the rides, it's great. That's called a golden ticket attack. You have somehow acquired the password hash for the KRB TGT account, and therefore you can forge your own magic band, ticket granting ticket, be anyone you want to be. It turns out, even if there's only one domain controller, you never logged on to it, you walk in and say, "Hi, I'd like an introduction." This is built for scale. They don't keep a database of active ticket granting tickets out there. This is why kicking out somebody in all of their authenticated sessions is hard, right? Kind of like NP hard level, but I digress. Next is Silver Ticket, which I'll be talking about here momentarily in my actual presentation. And Silver Tickets, again, a service ticket is signed by, encrypted with that service's account's password hash. That is a long phrase, but an important one. If I'm trying to access file server, file01, that's a completely random example that I'm not using in another couple of minutes. Well, the sys/file01 is the service principal name of file01, the computer. So the computer account password hash is what the domain controller gives you with that service ticket. Because the domain controller has everyone's secrets. The file server doesn't have to talk to the domain controller to validate that ticket. It validates it using its own secret. Well, if you've previously compromised that server, or maybe you tricked it into authenticating to you via NTLMv1, foreshadowing to my actual talk, then you can just be anyone you want to be to that one destination service. All right? And it turns out Kerberoasting is also quite easy to understand. Any user account with a registered service is therefore something you can get an introduction for, a service ticket for. And therefore, hey, domain controller, I'd like a service ticket to the service that Mike Saunders has in this environment. And then on my own machine, there's a portion that is signed by, encrypted with Mike's account's password hash. So I take a guess as to Mike's password. Fluffy Bunny 1? No. And take the hash and check the signature and guess again. Is it "I like to fish!" exclamation point? Yes. Okay, I just cracked the password. It's an offline operation. But if you don't have the 11 minutes, let's say I'm probably behind by a minute or so, to explain Kerberoasting, here's the TLDR, and my claim to fame is that Tim has used my Kerberoasting TLDR in his presentations, that any user account with a registered service principal name effectively has no lockout policy. That's not quite true, because lockout policy implies password guessing, whereas this is an offline password cracking approach. However, it still gets the right message across, especially to management who, if I go put the picture of Kerberoasting up, they'll, whatever, hacker boy, I don't care anymore. All right, it gets the right message across pretty quickly. All right. Any questions about all of Kerberos before I move over to my actual presentation? Why do user accounts end up with these service principal names? The stereotypical example is when installing Microsoft SQL Server, the easiest way to get it registered as a new service is to tie your account to that new service. But there are lots of other ways, and you often find services that no longer exist, which I believe Trimark has some things that can help you with finding those. This service ticket can't be useful in your environment, therefore you can safely remove it. Right? But to give you a couple of things to Google, managed service accounts, group managed service accounts, and the very latest delegated managed service account are all great answers, where Active Directory essentially manages the long, random, rotated password. All right, and now to our actual presentation. So I loathe the terminology, especially NTLM. So let's quickly just get down some basics, because jargon is wonderful, like the tool for bypassing AV. But jargon, when both sides don't understand it, is actively harmful for discussion, because the thing that I think I'm implying is not what you're receiving, right? So we have ye old landman hash. It involves DES again. We just had the one DES hammer and we beat all of our problems with it. We have the NT hash, which is UTF-16 little endian MD4 of the password up to 255 bytes, 127 characters. All right? That's your secret for you, used for NTLMv1, NTLMv2, and for Kerberos. We have ye old landman challenge response. If you're still using this, I am so sorry. Solve that problem before you get up to solving the NTLMv1 problem. All right? But, well, I'll do the next slide. Then we have NTLMv1 sometimes referred to as just NTLM, because it was the first one, so they didn't have the numbering. But I digress. NTLMv1 is the network challenge response protocol that uses the NT hash as the shared secret. NTLMv2 is also a network challenge response, also using the NT hash as the shared secret, but this time with slightly more riz. It's essentially the same idea, but it's not as catastrophically broken as NTLMv1, right? And if you just see NTLM, please always disambiguate, because people use that same phrase for so many different things. Sometimes password penetration testers will say, oh yeah, I got the NTLM hashes for that user account. And they mean the landman:NT hash and like Don the Ripper style for that particular user account. They might also be referring to NTLMv1 and NTLMv2 both simultaneously, as in all NTLMv star, if you will. All right? So this is why I'm rather picky as to my language. Even Microsoft sometimes refers to NT hashes as NTLM hashes, and it bothers me every time. If I had commit rights to that repo, I would fix that problem. All right. So let's just pull the audience for a moment. How many people work in environments with hundreds or thousands of machines, right? And those machines have some kind of single sign-on, and you authenticate machine to machine, right? You have 4 on-prem Windows protocols with a tiny asterisk to work with. Ye old landman challenge response, you shouldn't have that anymore. NTLMv1, which is embarrassingly common to have somewhere in the environment. NTLMv2 and Kerberos. You should try to move everything to Kerberos, but even Microsoft has admitted this will take a long time. Again, if you access by IP, you're not using Kerberos with the tiniest asterisk. That's probably not worth mentioning. We talked about that one before, right? So there is a registry key that sets, hey, which versions of these network authentication protocols are allowed. 2 and below is effectively just yelling the password in plain text at this point. The most important thing about a challenge response protocol is it's a challenge and response. It's not just, hey, Tim, I'd like to connect to your file share, please. And Tim says, what's the password? The password is filthy-money-12. Right? That's a really bad protocol because everyone just heard that password, right? So it's a mathematical challenge issued upon a secret that both sides have. It would be catastrophically bad if you could bring it back to just the secret directly. Hence this talk. Because you can. Any NTLMv1 authentication is about $30 away from takeover of that machine, with password cracking speeds being what they are today. All right? So it's real bad, right? And I say $30 away. That is actually what I spent for my most recent NTLMv1 cracking, because it turns out a single RTX 4090 can crack like 147 billion DES operations per second. So 2 to 56, check my math, is about 72 quadrillion. It's a real big number. When you start using scientific notation, that's the sign it's a real big number. But computers can count real fast. So it turns out at, 147 billion per second for a single RTX 4090, then this laptop could do it in 100 days or so. But what if I had 10 laptops or one machine with 10 GPUs installed? And what if instead of an anemic little laptop graphics processing unit, we had real desktop processing units? It's about 3 to 6 hours. And at $5 per hour for an 8x 4090 machine at vast.ai, it puts you in a pretty good spot for password cracking. Or rather, instead of, look, if you see NTLMv1, you can always guess a password, compute its NT hash, and then compare the server-issued challenge to the same response that you came up with. That's classic password cracking NTLMv1 authentication, what people tend to do with responder-style attacks. But instead of cracking the password, you can choose to crack the DES operation itself. Technically, you have to do 2 56-bit DES keys, but that doesn't really matter. All right? So a quick visualization here. blah, 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 right? Challenge response. That's the pretty important part. And here, the challenge and response is here. Take these 21 random bytes and spread out your NT hash over these random bytes and give me the response. Well, they give you 21 random bytes, and yet an NT hash is 16 bytes. Yeah, so the third one is padded out with zeros. It's real easy to crack when you have all of 4 hexadecimal characters to crack. Real fast. It's 2 bytes. 2 to the 16 operation 65536. Like less than a millisecond in Python, crappy Python that you're about to see. All right? So how do we get these NTLMv1 hashes? I went back and forth on should I have slides or not? Should I just do demo? We'll do demo, but I also like talking and having something on screen. So how do we get these hashes? Well, classically, a lot of pen testers will show up, have their own physical machine, or assume breach and drop off a device, or spin up a VM, and one of the things they like to do is run Responder. Windows, before it gives up on a DNS request, effectively broadcasts using multiple protocols. We have ye old NetBIOS name service, link local multicast name resolution, LLMNR, and multicast DNS or MDNS. Responder is called Responder because it says, yes, that's me. Whatever you're looking for, that's me. And when you connect, I'm going to ask for authentication. And it writes down those password hashes. Well, just like on the client side, you can have different versions of these challenge response protocols supported. Responder can also say, I'm only going to support NTLMv1 at best. You could argue this is a little bit of double or nothing. Now, you could go further than just Responder in the same subnet. It turns out all authenticated users by default can register new DNS names. So I could just passively observe in one subnet, hey, there's machines asking for an old SCCM server. But let's give a stereotypical example here. You have an agent that was installed on a bunch of endpoints, and you got rid of the server, and there's still agents that are mewling like sad kittens every 30 seconds or DNS timeout or whatever, saying, hey, anybody heard of an old SCCM server? I want to connect again. So you could, within that subnet, say, Responder, yep, that's me. Or you could register that name and get it across the entire enterprise, machines connecting to you. And there's also coerced authentication. Turns out there's lots of protocols, lots of APIs that allow you to authenticate to a computer and say, hey, can you go ahead and check what printers are available? What is the printer spool status of this machine over here? In other words, I am coercing you, telling you to authenticate to somebody else. Coerced authentication. All right? Coercer is the tool that I'll discuss in the repo here momentarily. All right? So what happens next? We have this NTLMv1 authentication attempt. Now we have that password hash, and now we start with the password cracking, or rather the DES cracking. All right? So vast.ai is that service I mentioned before. And I suppose I could bring that up. We also have this repository that's open now. Feel free to take pictures whenever you like, but I have these exact slides are on the last link along with the link to the repository itself. So there's plenty of other implementations out there, and extra special shout out to Evil Mog, the first one of this. I tried to make this a little bit easier and slightly more accurate just because I want NTLMv1 to die so badly. All right? So I talked through this whole coerced authentication thing here, and this is janky, but it works. So take all of your internal SMB servers that the pen testers, right, will often have a file like this. This is literally the file name I had on my last pen test. Take those machines one at a time and try to coerce authentication. I'm using timeout because, code conservatively, at some point coercer will crash. Plus, I don't want it to just hang forever. So a timeout command says, hey, run for a maximum of n seconds before essentially pressing Control-C. All right? So I try to coerce authentication to Responder as the target of that IP that's connecting. And any domain user can do that with any domain account. So assume breach, maybe your starting point, or maybe you cracked one account. There's a whole different world of attacks you can do with a single authenticated account. And by the way, computer accounts are accounts. You can't log on interactively with them, but they can do all of the Kerberos operations. You can Kerberoast using a computer account, etc. So if you find an unencrypted hard drive, you can absolutely rip out the local computer account password hash, as well as the actual plain text password. They're 120 characters. They're rotated periodically, essentially every month or so, but they're actual passwords associated. It's fun to see. Anyway, so at that point, you can install NTLMv1.py. Hopefully you have responder at that point. And the usage here is to give the password hash in the same responder format with --NTLMv1. And part of the output it gives you, it breaks out all of that output. It does built-in crack the last couple of bytes of that NT hash because there's just so little entropy there. And then it gives you the commands to crack using hashcat. Now, literally copying and pasting this command won't work for two reasons. The first reason is, look, unless the carsets folder is in your local working directory, okay, you're going to have to update it to wherever you installed hashcat. And the second is, you're probably going to want to run this command on some beefy box with a lot of GPUs, not your laptop. Right? It was like 115 days when I copied and pasted this exact command in preparation for this one. Right? So at this point, you do hashcat, just swapping in the full path to, hey, hashcat crack des, don't try to crack the passwords. The !1 here you see on screen, that is the custom character set. Like you could say, the first letter of the password is capitalized, so use A through Z for that. There's actually a built-in one, !U, right? The next 5 characters are all lowercase. $L, $L. We're instead cracking all of the possible des keys at that position instead. All right? So if you're curious and you want to walk through this, this is actually a working example that you can take this exact command, and I have given you the first 5 bytes of the des key in both of those cases so that it cracks in like 10 seconds on a VM with no real resources, right? That way you can do it and test it and not have to spin up. It is all of $30 and maybe 6 hours on average, but assuming a random distribution, it's going to be like half of the total time. So 3 to 6 hours, right? So, or I think it might be 4 to 8, maybe up to $40. Not a huge deal. Well, once you have a computer account password hash, which is what you retrieve after doing a little bit of conversions, this will be the full password hash of the computer account. And at that point, I have a link there, you could do a silver ticket attack, as in, hey, I'm not even going to make my fake magic band, I'm going to make my ride ticket to this one ride over here, file 01, and I can claim to be anyone I want to be to that one destination machine. You want to be domain admin? You're a domain admin. You want to be enterprise admin too? Sure. You want to be a schema admin? That's a weird flex. But okay, you can be that too. You can be anyone you want to be to that one service, to that one computer in this example. So at that point, you can take over that machine, and like we've seen in so many pen tests, so many breaches, it starts the credential avalanche, what I think Sean Metcalf refers to as the credential shuffle. You go into the first box, get those first credentials, and use them to authenticate to the second box. You grab the badge from that second machine, and you continue on just getting more and more credentials. But yes, any machine with LM compatibility level set to 2 or below is essentially trivial to take over completely. If only you had a way in your environment to check settings on all machines. Hardware inventory, software inventory, and the ability to affect change. This is what actually matters for security. This is one small example of it, but it's a spot where most of the blog posts talking about NTLMv1 don't say it quite as loudly, right? $30 and 6 hours later, I come back in and I'm in control of that machine just by having some registry key. That's an important registry key. It needs more words about it, right? Any questions here? I think I have about 10 minutes left. That does include domain controllers, and that's a perfect segue, actually, because domain controllers have a very special secret between other domain controllers for magic bands, ticket writing tickets, the Kerb TGT account password hash. But domain controllers don't use the KERBTT account when they're authenticating to each other to synchronize, to do DC sync. In fact, the computer account of a domain controller is one of the few that is always allowed to DC sync. So it goes from you're in control of that machine to you're in control of that domain, nay, you're in control of that forest, because the forest is the security boundary, not the domain. This gets a little bit into the weeds, but domains within a given Active Directory forest are a replication boundary, administrative boundary. It doesn't matter, right? Whereas the forest actually matters mostly until, what's his name? Until Harmjoy breaks forest-to-forest security again, which has already happened at least once. I think it's twice, actually. But generally speaking, if one domain controller in one domain is compromised, please consider that entire forest compromised. The easiest example is when I forge my magic band, I have extra SIDs that I can incorporate. And because of moving between domains, we can say, hey, yeah, I'm domain admin right now, but I also used to be known as domain admin in your parent domain. So now I walk up to the parent domain controller and I'm an admin there too. And in practice, forest-to-forest pillaging compromise is often possible because of silly things like cross-forest group memberships. Oh yeah, Mike is domain admin of domain A and forest A, but also a member of domain admins in forest B, domain B. So it gets real bad real quick if it's on a domain controller. Wonderful question. I did not seed that one. It turns out that other talk was bit.ly/top attacks. It's one of my favorites to give. It goes over a lot of top network attacks. And the first top network attack, oh, well, after password spraying, is file shares of sensitive information. You have each department has their file share, but what about cross departments? Let's just make a company-wide file share. And people use it, like people often make their username as a folder and treat it as if it were a private file share. So people will often point to Snaffler, and I love Snaffler. Letting it show up on screen so you can all see it. Snaffler is amazing for run as a domain user. It finds all domain joined computers, enumerates all domain shares on each of those computers, and traverses each of those file shares looking for certain patterns. I don't care what the file name is if it ends with .vmem, right? A paused virtual machine, or VMDK, or let's say PS1 PowerShell files that have patterns of credentials inside, right? It's looking for that kind of candy. But my favorite thing that people don't commonly talk about is something that takes more work. This is not just like cool flavor text, it's actually the command I copy and paste myself using PowerView to get all of those file shares, do a quick manual review, and then add those file shares to commodity desktop search software. Let it chew on all of those file formats, up to and including actual OCR. I like Copernic Desktop Search. In fact, this week I got my renewal for all of $30 for the next year. It's not security software, it's regular consumer software. All right? So now you can search for patterns that are useful inside of your own organization, which might include things like not to be shared outside of your company, or internal only, or whatever phrases are in use inside your particular environment that Snaffler is not going to have a pattern for. Other questions? I think I'm about out on time. Less.
Post the link.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'll do that, but I'll also remind you that it's on screen. Also, hi, I'm Jeff. I teach for SANS. I come present here as my very favorite conference of the year. Here is the QR code, and here is the bit.ly link. It turns out everything I do is bit.ly/2words for the presentation. I will also reserve the right to photobomb every photo being taken right now. And last question. The question is, can you force rotation of computer account passwords? Yes. By default, they're rotated every 30 days, and it is rather easy to do so. However, if you wanted a sneaky persistence mechanism, Sean, Netcat, has a whole bunch of sneaky 80 persistence. One of those that he doesn't talk about that I think is awesome and terrifying is dumping the computer account password hash of a domain controller because it can DC sync. And there's literally a single registry key you can set that computer accounts will never reset its password ever again. Even if you change literally every user account in the environment and double tap KerbGGT, I can still DC sync and just walk in and get the latest password hash to whatever account I want. And again, the password hash is the secret. The console asks you for a password, but the APIs use the password hash. Other than RDP mostly and the console, you never need the password. All right, I think that'll actually do it. Also, hi, I do consulting. That is the end total of the salesmanship.